Welcome to Beyond Rockets. Hope you're having a great day. My name is Clark Dunn and I'm your host. Get ready to enjoy some awesome conversations from Huntsville locals about cool work they are doing right here in the Rocket City. You can connect with us on social media at Beyond Rockets, and if you're interested in doing a podcast yourself, I'd love to hear from you. You can visit my website, beyondrockets.com today, or connect with me on LinkedIn at Clark Dunn. Sit back and enjoy this episode of Beyond Rockets. Well, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you. I think, the Ignite and the company that you're CEO and owner of has grown like crazy in the last couple of years, and excited to talk a little bit about that. Before we get into that, would you like to introduce yourself and we'll kind of get started there?
So my name is Clayton Hinchman. I'm the chairman and CEO of a company called Ignite. We're headquartered in Huntsville, Alabama, but currently have locations in roughly 25 different states and now in Europe and the Pacific Indo-PACOM region.
Awesome. And so you're originally from the Texas area. Talk a little bit about, so I kind of, as doing sort of the research and having this conversation with you, your background in the Army is a big part of kind of your story and kind of that transition into kind of then coming to Huntsville.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about your time in the Army and kind of what ultimately led to your retirement in 2008.
Yeah, so I'm from a small town. I was born in a town called San Benito, which is in the Rio Grande Valley. You got a lot of people refer to it as just, the valley. I grew up in the valley. I graduated from a small, not very small school, but small school south of Houston called Angleton, Texas. I had it was a great hometown. It was a great piece of Americana, as I've always said. I loved being from Southeast Texas. It really was a hodgepodge of demographics that I grew up in. A lot of different types of people, especially as you get into Houston as well. You have all sorts of people from, internationals as well, from the oil, chemical, gas companies that are there. Most of my family grew up working either in the prison system or the unions, the oil and chemical and gas companies. But yeah, so I was lucky and I got a flyer from West Point when I was a sophomore in high school. And I just vividly remember there was a young lady who was in like a theater arts class who told me that I couldn't get in when they were asking about where you wanted to go to college. And I remember taking that as a challenge, and that just became, a thing for me to do. And I just always felt, not to get philosophical, that God was sort of like testing me, that there was something else I should be doing and trying my own way. And I was lucky enough to get accepted to West Point. I had a bad shoulder from a high school injury, so they actually turned me down. And then I had to prove and do all these silly sort of tests to prove that my shoulder was strong enough. And then I ended up getting accepted and got a nomination from my congressman at the time. And then I started in 2001, the end of June, beginning of July 2001, I got accepted to the academy. And, 4 months later, the towers came down, and I just happened to be in New York City, and that sort of carved my path. I knew I wanted to fight bad guys and just become an airborne ranger. So I hate to say that, the 9/11 happened, the towers coming down, it really affected all of us, every single American. And I just knew I wanted to fight bad guys. And so life became really easy for me. I was 18 years old. I still did dumb stuff that teenagers do and early 20-year-olds do, but I knew what I wanted to do with my life, and that helped the 4 years at the academy go by, because I knew sort of what my path was. And, so many young people struggle to find what their path is. It takes us all a minute. And the academy gave me purpose and taught me a lot of discipline to focus in on a long-term strategic goal. And that's how I just started down the path of the military.
Yeah. And so in 2008, you were kind of doing a night raid to go and kill Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Talk a little bit about kind of your role in the Army at that point and sort of that experience, because that experience, ultimately changed your life.
Yeah, I had been a platoon leader in 10th Mountain Division for about a year and a half, give or take. I had trained, so I did all the Airborne Ranger School stuff at Fort Benning, and I ended up in a heavy weapons platoon at one point. So I'd been a platoon leader for a long time, and my battalion commander had asked me if I wanted to be an executive officer or if I wanted to take over this direct action mission. We were getting tasked to Special Operations Task Force 17. And I looked at my battalion commander and said, no lieutenant wants to be an XO. Nobody wants to do that job. You're the supply guy for the company, even though you're second in command of the company. And so I was able to get a second platoon. When I found out they were doing direct action hits against known Al-Qaeda targets, I was not going to not do that mission. And but unfortunately, May 10th of 2008, I stepped on a pressure wire IED, which was connected to they said it was a 122 millimeter mortar round. It's a Russian made round, which has a 5 to 7 meter kill radius. So, it was a fun and intense mission. It ended abruptly. My career ended abruptly, but I absolutely loved it. I'm obviously jaded. I've said before, but 10th Mountain Division has the greatest soldiers and the greatest NCOs because they are the most deployed soldiers that the United States Army has ever had. We deploy these young men and women consistently, so their tactical skills that they become proficient in, their leadership skills they become proficient in. My soldiers took it really hard that I got wounded because I was platoon leader, but 15 guys walked over the IED before I stepped on it, and it was just my turn to go. And so, it is what it is, but my guys saved me. I almost lost my left leg. They put a tourniquet on each one of my legs, or what was left of my right leg, and medevaced me and saved my life. So, they're heroes. And then they continued the mission for like 3 or 4 more days after, putting me back together. So, it was a lot of fun, but, it could also, the biggest leadership lesson I had from the Army was keeping soldiers focused on the mission. My guys, I never gave them time to rest. I was consistently training. I was consistently hard on them. That way at 2 a.m, when some dummy gets blown up, they reacted. And it's the same way with running a company. To me, you have to have the discipline to consistently do, an ethical way of running your business, treating people fairly, of doing your administrative side of the business properly. And so we're scaling Ignite. We're growing internationally. That only happens when you grow the right way and you have the administrative functions and the discipline to do that the right way. You don't miss payroll. You don't miss benefits. You don't miss these things. You don't worry about your customer being able to pay up front because you run a cash strong business. All of those things. And the missions change and some of the deliverables a little bit different, but I use a lot of the same soft skills, I guess is what they're called in the military, of discipline that I use for running Ignite. To me, the mission might be a little bit different, but it's the same. It's a lot of the same entrepreneurial spirit that we had to consistently stay focused on discipline as well. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that those administrative, the things that aren't the most fun things about running a business are the things that really help grow the business. And it's that it, in some cases can be tedious, some cases can be boring, but it's really that underlying thing that can catapult the business. And I think Ignite's seen that in the last really 5-6 years.
Yep.
That you're now kind of the benefits of those things early on when you became the CEO, you're now seeing the fruits of the labor now.
Yeah, I mean, I took over as CEO 6 years ago of Ignite. I had run my business, sold it, and then I took over Ignite. My whole objective was to turn Ignite into an enterprise, into a global enterprise. I used to be very afraid. I'm very, not skeptical, but paranoid. Before I'd play a football game, I wouldn't tie my shoes until the game started, right? Baseball players, they do their gloves. I didn't want to talk about my goals publicly or put them down on paper, not because I was scared of them, because I thought I didn't want to get ahead of myself. I didn't want to get too big for my own britches. But we're going to turn Ignite into a global firm, and we've already done that. And you have to do those boring administrative functions very well.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, because it's not sexy, they don't value that, and it's not cool. And maybe that's true. Doesn't matter. You still got to do it. And if you want to run a scalable business, if you want to make acquisitions in cash, a lot of bankers don't like me. I hope none of the bankers watch this, but we don't run up lines of credit. I don't run Ignite like my own wallet and piggy bank. We run a cash strong business. That way we can make acquisitions. If we do hit a speed bump with a customer, or we have some sort of issue with, getting paid or whatever, I'm not worried about it. And I don't worry about that because we run a very clean, administratively, superb company in my opinion, right? So I love and trust my people tremendously, but it's not the cool stuff that people see, but you have to do it well.
Mm.
And that goes back to my military time of understanding what each soldier's tactical proficiencies were. That way, it's the same as my administrative staff, my finance staff, my contract staff. I understand what they're doing day in and day out. I spend the time to respect them and what they do in their job. That way, I can go out and support our customers and be external facing, right? Because I know those things are getting handled right.
Mm.
But it all goes back to discipline and doing what it takes to be successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, your first sort of entrepreneurial business that you ran was called USI.
Yep.
You started that in DC. Talk a little bit about that business. I mean, I think at the time when you ended up moving to Huntsville for the first time or moving to Huntsville in 2012, it was just you and your wife that were kind of doing the business.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that business and then kind of the growth to 2016 when ultimately at the time Alitech, now Ignite, would acquire your business.
Yeah, so I started my firm called USI, and it was just my wife and I. And we bought a house online, and we moved to Huntsville with my
And
six.
You had never been to Huntsville or had been to
I'd
Huntsville?
been here once. I'd been to Huntsville one time.
Okay.
Um,
What year was that?
it was 2011,
Okay.
maybe the end of 2010.
A year or two prior to actually
Yep.
moving?
Yeah, so I had been, and I was working at the time. I had worked at JIDO, the Joint IED Center, but at the time I was finishing my master's at Georgetown at night, and my master's is in policy. And I was working for the Military Officer Association. I was advocating for veterans benefits. That was my job.
Mm.
And I had some great mentors. I knew I wanted to start a defense contracting business, but I wanted to finish my master's and learn to walk at the same time. And so, we bought a house and moved here, and just put our heads down and worked very hard. But in about 4 years, we grew to about 40 something, almost 50 employees. I don't remember the exact
Wow.
number. And we had a second daughter, and it was just my wife and I. And it was very stressful on our home life. We didn't argue about much, but we argued about the company. And it wasn't about finance or anything. It was, the day in and day out grind. I'm working a 12-hour day, and then I go home, and my wife is helping with payroll and 401ks, asking me questions. And I'm like, holy shnikes, like you need a break. You need, now we have rules in our house
Yeah.
about,
Have that separation a little bit.
yeah, you have to, right? And she still helps some with the company. But I have 3 rules. You don't talk about politics, you don't talk about money, and I don't talk about the company in front of my children. And now that my daughters are becoming teenagers, they're starting to learn a little bit more. But every 4th of July, my daughters have had to do a 5-step business plan. So I'm trying to teach them finance. But, when they're 10 years old, they don't understand the same finance the way we run a company, right? If you're talking about $100 million contract with Aviation Missile Center, your children don't understand that, right? So we keep that segregated in the house. But no, I sold to what was then Alitech. And Jason Shelton was the CEO, was a friend of mine. I knew him from the community. And a gentleman named Joe Alexander, who had been a mentor to me and was the president of Camber before they were acquired many, many years ago. And Joe knew Jason. And I said, look, this is very stressful at the house. And he asked me if I'd be willing to talk to Jason. And that was it. And it was a very simple acquisition. I had other people try to acquire us.
Yeah. What were your 3 stipulations?
Yeah, it was very simple. It was, you got to change the name of Alitech. I cost this much money on a 5-year contract, and the company cost this. It's very simple. And I wasn't being disrespectful to Alitech, but what I told Jason is that he was a new leader. I was a new leader. Alitech basically didn't exist anymore. The contracts did. So, we put it to the employees. Our employees came up with Ignite, and it was one of like 300 names. I think we had scribbled on a board, and the employees did an offsite, came back with it. Ignite and fueling innovation was the tagline at the time, and our teammates came up with it. But but I wanted to give it to the employees because it was new leadership, new direction. And that's really where our igniters came up with the
Yeah.
name. I didn't do it myself. So.
Yeah. And so you kind of had that term in place to, 5 years. You would work about a year or so before you became majority owner, CEO of Ignite. You kind of had a little sabbatical
Yeah.
from the business. 12 months, 16 months or so before you actually bought the business. Talk a little bit about that and then kind of the transition to becoming the CEO of Ignite.
Yeah. So I'd been at Ignite about 2.5 years, and you know, Jason and I just had a different view of what we wanted to turn into Ignite. And I think Jason was okay sort of doing the commoditized IT work. It was steady, it wasn't as rocky. And so I'll be honest, I was becoming disenfranchised with, where I just wanted to sort of take the company, or where I thought we could go. Jason was in charge, where I thought we could go. And, so I went to acquire another business, or was going to try to acquire another business. And I left for a short sabbatical, as we say. And then at one point I was unemployed. I didn't have a job.
How long was that stint?
So I left the firm. It was almost a full year, but
Okay.
for 10 months I was trying to work on a deal. Didn't work out. And there was about 2 months where I had no job.
What did you like? I mean, it seemed as though from the age of 18, you had kind of done something. Like you had always been doing something. Those
Yeah.
2 months, what did it
It's miserable.
feel like?
It's miserable.
Okay.
I mean, the worst time in my life when I lost my leg. I tried to learn how to walk quickly. I had about 35 surgeries on my leg, and I've had my ears done about 5 times, and I have prosthetic ear bones, but they wouldn't let me work. And I was trying to get out of Walter Reed to go to work. So I just wanted to work. And my parents are divorced. My grandfather was, my role model, and so was my older brother. And they just worked. Where I'm from, men just work. And so my grandfather worked with horses until he was like 98 and third pacemaker, and he finally collapsed, and that's just where I'm from. It's what I knew of the world. So not being able to work for me is miserable. And I think the term is being a highly industrious person. And it was just the role models that I always looked up to, and it was being productive. I am completely useless when it comes to using my hands and tools. I try very hard, but I'm not very good. But I'm always going to try to better myself. And so it was a hard time in my life emotionally. Being wounded is one thing. You go through all those phases, but when you can't work and you feel like you're absolutely useless and you have no reason to live, it was a hard time to go through those 2 months. So
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things too. It's funny because when you talk about like all the education you've had. I mean, getting your undergraduate from West Point, getting your master's from Georgetown, going to executive training and doing education stuff at Vanderbilt. That kind of it almost seems as though that itch to do that was back when you were in high school and the person said like you couldn't really get into it. And you're like, wait, I can actually do this, and now I'll do all of this. And you kind of have these 2 months between becoming the CEO, majority owner of Ignite, where you're just kind of in limbo, kind of just trying to figure out what's next.
Yeah.
2020, May 1st of 2020, you become the owner and CEO, majority owner. The other 49% is ESOP for the company. What was the company doing at that time as you became the CEO, kind of the size of the company? And then what did those maybe first 6, 12 months as CEO look like for you?
Yeah. So we were about, I'm going to mess up the numbers. Forgive me. So somebody will fact check me somewhere. We were about 150 employees, give or take. It was lower labor categories. And what I mean by that, it was a lot of it was commoditized IT, help desk type support. Good people, just not, we couldn't charge as much, right? And it just is what it is. Within the first 60 days, we had boosted a company who we were the prime, had outgrown the size standard. They became the prime. Well, within the first 60 days, they did not exercise an option year and took about 35 employees from us. So we went from 150 to about 115 as soon as I bought the company. So my goal at that time, excuse me, my goal at that time, I told our CFO, was to stabilize share value. I just didn't want share value to go down.
Mm.
And so in 2020, when we finished the year, though, I think our share value went up by 10%. And that was during COVID. So I didn't think that was possible, but I think our share value went up a little bit, not a lot. But we were able to recapture some of that revenue, but it was higher quality work, subject matter type work, PhD level, higher classified type work. And so that's what we were able to do within the first, I don't know, probably 6 to 9 months. 2021 hit, and I wanted to grow a little bit, but we didn't. We grew even more. So, that first, and I didn't sue the company that stole the work from us. I told the owner, I said, "Oh, okay, I understand the move here. I had the right to, I didn't. That's not how we do business. Because I just believe in karma. And all I've tried to do is outperform some of our competitors. And I took that slight as, it's fuel, it's motivation. But that was the first 18 months of Ignite. In the middle of COVID, we grew. Even the first 60 days, we had that, we got slashed. And so I think we went from 150 to 115 in the first 60 days. And then by the end of the year, we were at 130. And then the end of 2021, we were at 140, 150. And now today we're sitting 200. And we have to, like I said, we're hiring internationally. So we should be at 240, 250 by the end of 2026 or greater. I think our team could do better, but that was the first year when I took over Ignite.
So then I know in 2026, like you mentioned, you're now globally, and in 2020, in that first kind of, as you're making that transition, you lost that, 35, 50 employees. Was mostly all the work Huntsville, or kind of what did the sort of the landscape of Ignite employees and the area that you were kind of serving look like at that time?
Yeah, at that time, I think only 20 to 25% of our workforce was in Huntsville.
Oh, wow.
Those 35 FTEs or full-time equivalent, sorry, those 35 employees were all Huntsville based, primarily. Ignite, we have been able to diversify, which is, it's good and bad in a small business, right? It's difficult to control. It's difficult to translate to new customers, but it's good in the sense that our revenue stream isn't one customer. Our contracts aren't one customer. So we're fairly diversified, about 4 or 5 different customer bases. And contractually, we've been able to diversify tremendously. So I'm very proud of that. But yeah, that's how we've been able to sort of separate that, I guess.
Yeah, and I would assume, like, when you became the CEO, you were kind of looking at that pie chart of, hey, here's where revenue streams are from, the percentage of quarterly or yearly revenue that comes from these, and then trying to diversify in a way.
Yep.
I know when we first met a couple weeks ago, you were talking about kind of as the transition in 2026 and kind of the future, Huntsville is kind of big role into what you're hoping Ignite kind of even establishes itself even more locally too.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that and kind of how that transition, even though you are globally expanding, Huntsville is still kind of, you're wanting to reinvent or reintroduce the Huntsville market to Ignite in a different way moving forward.
Yeah, Ignite had a big problem in the past. And like I said, I'm not going to disparage, any of my predecessors whatsoever. It was just a different strategy of how to grow the business. And I was able to benefit from the growth that they had set up. So I'm very thankful for them, for what they created for us. But, we didn't have a lot of relationships. And so our industry, as all industries are, relationship based. So we have invested Ignite in the relationships of our customers in Huntsville. And so our competitors know what we're doing. You can see the type of caliber of people that we're hiring. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. So we're hiring top tier talent in Huntsville, incentivize them very well on top of the equity stake and the shares that they earn. And so Huntsville is the epicenter of a lot of our growth. And it was the reason why I moved to Huntsville 15, 16 years ago, because of the amount of work and the quality of work that is done at Redstone Arsenal. You know, I'd been here one time and I had friends in DC like, oh, you're moving to Huntsville. Well, the cost of living is reasonable, but there's top tier work that's done here. So you have high caliber people, high caliber work. I want to be in the middle of the fight. The middle of the fight was here in Huntsville, locally, if you want to work with the Army primarily. Although there's 70 something other commands that are on Redstone. But we have, you know, offices in Dayton, Colorado Springs, Eglin Air Force Base, where that fight is, or where the warfighter needs the work, that's where we go. But Huntsville is a tremendous piece of that because of our Army connections, our Army heritage, and the type of work that spreads from Redstone Arsenal. So we've made heavy investments in the relationships, and go to LinkedIn, go to social media, see the type of talent that we brought onto our team and the people that are committed to being igniters. So, I mean, I think it's, you know, it's pretty apparent where we're going as a company, you know.
100%. And over the last, you know, in the last couple of years, you've also kind of expanded in some other sort of partnerships. I think there's a partnership you have with Radiance.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. I think that's is a unique thing that you have started, and you're, you know, kind of expanding with Radiance, who is also a big company here in Huntsville that has had longstanding sort of history here in this town.
Yeah, no. So, you know, I've known Bill Bailey, the CEO, for a long time. He's been a friend and mentor. We trade who has read more books than the other one. But, you know, Radiance has built a tremendous reputation with the intelligence community. And that is where we had penetrated a part of that market. And I said, hey, I'd love the mentorship. We love the partnership. We're still a small business. They're bigger than us. You know, but that goes outside of Radiance as well. You know, there's companies like Torch, Colsa, Intuitive, a lot of these really great companies that we've built partnerships with, because they have people, we can learn from, but they have tremendous 30, 40-year reputations from the individuals that are there. And that's the same thing. You know, we made an acquisition last year of a company called Reliant Technologies. Mr. Joe Hatchett, who, first of all, is one of the most phenomenal people I've ever met in my life. But Joe had built a career 30, 35, 40 years, not only of Reliant, but also himself. That I tell companies when we discuss acquisitions, Ignite and Clayton Hinchman, I don't come to you and think that I know how to run your company better. That's not how we operate. What I look at is there's an opportunity for you, if you're looking for an exit, to come under our board, and then your people to be given professional development opportunities as we grow and expand. And a lot of companies that are under 50, 100, under 100 employees, you know, that's a heavy administrative burden to grow.
I mean, you were there with USI, like you understand.
I was there. I did exactly what Mr. Hatchett did. The only difference is I was just a little bit younger and said, oh, I don't want to retire yet. You know, Joe wanted to retire and he had the right to do so. He'd built a phenomenal company and had phenomenal people on his team that were a little bit younger. But yeah, no, I did it. And that's a part of the acquisition pitch is like, I've been in this position, you know, and I think there's a respect piece. I have a lot of classmates from West Point that go off and get their MBAs from Harvard, Stanford, MIT. You know, it's a standard thing at some of these top tier schools. And when they look at making acquisitions, they get in that world. Sometimes I tell them, like, get that Harvard out of your mouth, right? When you're talking to somebody that bootstrapped something and built it from the ground up, and you're investing other people's money, understand that when you go into the negotiation. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have to talk turkey at some point. You do. But when you're talking to somebody who didn't pay themselves to make payroll, when you're talking to somebody that didn't pay themselves because, you know, they had to invest in something and they didn't know how they were going to pay their mortgage, that is a different stress level that some of my classmates have never dealt with. And I'm not saying they're dumb or, you know, it's just make sure you consider that when you go to make an acquisition of somebody else, that your pomp and circumstance and your arrogance doesn't come off. Because if, you know, I've been from the ground up. You come at me with a certain level and a certain strategy of acquisition, probably wouldn't mean to, but I probably get defensive. You know, I don't mean to, but it's human nature. If you think you know better than I do, it's like, well, shoot, partner. Like, I mean, you weren't here when we were in the middle of the knife fight, you know, but you're going to critique me on how I should have fought that battle, but you weren't in the fighting position in the foxhole with me. You know what I'm saying? So I just try to keep that perspective when we deal with potential partners, clients, or potential acquisition targets.
Yeah.
So.
And so, I mean, you've, as a career in the roles you've had at USI, selling that, now as CEO of, at Ignite, you've also done other things personally that's kind of been the business acquisition. I think what's interesting, and I would love your perspective on it, how much do you think from the other things you've done that we've talked about off air that you've done with other sort of business endeavors, do you play the experiences in your career help with those versus how much does the experience in those different acquisitions outside of your career help with your career?
Um, are you talking about the distillery or which
Yeah,
piece?
like, I mean, I think that the distillery was a good a lesson learned,
Yeah.
but, like, how do you think you bring more to the table with your experiences from your career into stuff like that? Or as with something like that that happens with the distillery, does those lessons kinda play a role into kind of future stuff with the career?
So I have an intern this summer, and I've never had an intern in my life. So I made an agenda, but I'm trying to teach. When I started this thing, I always tell young people or whoever start a company, show up when you meet with a mentor with an agenda, show up clean and show up prepared, right? And then uh, fuck off when the time. Oh, pardon me, you know, be mindful of the time, right? If I give you an hour, cut it an hour, and I've tried to do that with my mentors, and people want to give their knowledge. If I've made money or I've built something, I want people to take some of the battle scars that I have and get better.
Hmm.
I try to give them to my children, but I want people in business to have them as well. Like, hey, Clark, don't do what I did. It's like, don't do that, because people did that for me,
Mm.
and so it meant something to me. But when I talk about my intern, uh, I'm typically reading 3 or 4 books at the same time. I listen to Audible, but I also read books. I'm a nerd on history, Bible history, but also business, finance. I'm always trying to learn, leadership or whatever it is, culture. And it's the same as business is how do you apply something that I learned at Vanderbilt, which has nothing to do with defense contracting, to our business practices? I sent our CFO to Stanford University to a CFO program. Our CFO is the gold standard in defense. He has a CPA, CPMA, MBA. He's a forensic accountant. He was going to learn from the students, not from the professor, you know? And so all of the things that I've done outside of Ignite, which I've tried to minimize because I just don't have time, but, what are the lessons learned? And I could go on and on a lot of lessons learned of things I've done poorly, but you got to find what you're passionate about. You can't, what's the old say? You can't change a zebra's stripes, right? People, there's a great book by a lady named Angela Duckworth on grit. And she basically points out, look, by the early 20s, either you have grit or you don't. And that comes from your upbringing, your parents, your social standing, and not social standing with wealth, but I mean, did your parents force you to face hardship? Are you okay? Are you comfortable with being uncomfortable? You know? And that's always stuck with me because, I've known a lot of people that have quit things that are hard when they had all the talents in the world. They had all of God's gifts, physically, mentally, but they never spent the time to develop heart. And you can see that. You can see that when you're working with somebody through a hard problem, when they get stressed out with a minor inconvenience. What happens when you have a major inconvenience, right? What happens when you don't meet a sales quota? Are you going to buckle down and work harder? Or are you going to say, oh, the whole world's against me? I mean, I've seen that, from the sales side. I've been told no a million times. And some people really cannot deal with rejection, I guess I go back to my days in high school and college being rejected all the time, but you just sort of get used to it. What's the long-term goal? Are you committed to the long-term goal? And, you know, I'll be honest. I have a reputation because I've made enemies along the way. But every decision that I've made internally to Ignite has always in the made in the best interest of the long-term success of my firm. Never acted unethical, immoral, illegal. I'll tell you one thing personally. I don't deal with post-traumatic stress. I have people that talk to me about all their disability claims. I can't stand victim status, but when it comes to me and the things that I dealt with, I never did anything in combat that was illegal, unethical, or immoral. So I don't worry about, I did my job. I did what I was trained to do. Some people have a harder time dealing with that. And I respect that, they should get the help that they need. But, it's just, to me, it's the same thing in business. You treat people ethically, you treat them fairly, you follow the rules. But then again, you also have to make the hard decisions that are in the best interest of your firm. If you have an employee that's not performing and you've counseled them, what do? Do you keep them on payroll at the negative impact of the rest of your teammate? I mean, right? I have this one personal relationship with Clark. Screw everybody else because I like Clark. Is that fair to everybody else? No, it's not, right? And some people at small business particularly have a hard time going, well, I know Clark's spouse and I know their kids and it's just going to suck. Anytime I've had to do something very difficult personally at Ignite or made a move from the executive staff, you could ask my HR team. I have to spend 10 to 15 minutes gathering my courage because I'm changing somebody's life. You know what I'm saying? And so eventually it's like, okay, Clay, let's move. But it's like courage. I'm like staring in the mirror because it's hard. I don't want to do that to that person. But, you have to look at what's the best benefit of the firm. And we've agreed as Igniters to the long-term success of that firm. So now I've got to take this action. You know what I'm saying? And so it's difficult, but I've learned, I've got a lot of battle scars,
Yeah, and I think you built this culture that you want to succeed, and oftentimes those are hard decisions, it does and can and will alter the culture if you let something like that stay. And so
100%.
I think though the decision's hard, though the decision's not easy, though it does have impacts and affects people. At the end of the day, you have 100 and 200 plus employees that it affects as well, and it's the longevity of the company itself. It's not just today. It's 5 years from now. It's 2 months from now. It's whatever.
Any favoritism, real or perceived, leads to cynicism, which creates cancer. And you cannot have a little bit of cancer in your firm. You have to operate. And trust me, all operations are painful, but they're necessary to move forward. And I'll say it again. Any favoritism, real or perceived, leads to cynicism, which leads to cancer. It creates cancer. And you just can't have it because your firm dies. Your firm eventually wilts and dies. And that favoritism can be found in lots of different avenues, but you have to hold people accountable. And that's why you codify things. At Ignite, we have the Ignite way. It's on our badges and it's on the walls. Employees know what it is, how we act, how we treat people, and how we treat our customers, right? The importance of the mission, particularly to the warfighter, right? This is serious stuff. I've told my team before, sometimes people think they just work at a job. We're literally impacting history. We literally have people that are in harm's way today supporting the warfighter and creating the next 30 to 40 years the next future operating environment of warfare for the United States and our allies. You guys are a part of history, and so I try to remind people of what they do day in and day out and the impacts that it has globally and the history that they're a part of. Because sometimes people think, oh, I'm just doing this job, and they don't realize the impacts that they have on so many, many people that they just, you just don't think about that sometimes.
Yeah.
They're just doing their jobs,
Yeah. So I have 2 more questions as we get ready to wrap up. I enjoy reading it myself. I enjoy listening to audiobooks. I enjoy book recommendations. 3 books that you recommend any business owner, small business, entrepreneur, somebody that is or it could be for anybody. It could be a book that you've read recently or a book that you always recommend. What are your 3 recommendations?
The two easy ones for me are Grit by Angela Duckworth and Culture Code by James Coyle, Coyle. Um, I think the third more depends on sort of your industry. For us at Ignite, I have a lot of people read the SAIC solution, and not because SAIC was an ESOP, but I believe that the gentleman and the people that started that company understood teamwork, and they understood codifying the principles of what you want to stand for.
Mm.
I talked to a firm yesterday that was smaller than mine, and I said the same thing to a lot of small business owners. When do you stop working in the business and you work on it? I chose early on at Ignite to work on it, not in it. I consulted at DARPA with Booz Allen, and I consulted myself where I build hours. But then I made the choice and I said, okay, I think I can do more if I'm working on it, not in it.
Mm.
And that means I didn't get paid for a long time, right? And so, like I said, I'm not 100% disabled. I wasn't getting this VA money, so I had to go out and earn. I had to perform, But those are the 3 books, I think, in the defense side, that the SAIC solution, the Culture Code, and Grit. I think those give a lot of foundational things of how you should structure your company and the types of people you want in your company.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, we'll have those 3 books listed in the episode notes, so if people wanna find out more, get those books, read them, everything like that. Final question I ask every guest that comes on. We've talked a lot about your story, the story of Ignite. The growth is incredible to see kinda where we are now in 2026. We're recording this in June. If someone's listening and they want to connect, they wanna find out job openings, they wanna see what you're doing, they wanna be a part of the action, and they want to just maybe learn more and find out more information, where's the best place for them to connect, find out more information, and potentially even join Ignite?
Yeah, the best is www.igniteimpossible.com. You can always go to social media, LinkedIn. You can search my name, Ignite, Clayton Hinchman, Hinchman. And that's the best way to find us. All of our job postings are on LinkedIn, on our social media, as well as connecting with me directly. But that's where our jobs are, and you'll see a lot of current openings that are actively being filled. So I challenge all of your listeners to go there. But igniteimpossible.com, or just look Ignite and Clayton Hinchman. I don't know, type in old one leg or something. It might pop up too. I don't know. So
I appreciate you taking the time. We'll have everything in the episode notes, so if you want to find out more about Ignite, more links to those books, links to anything that we talked about, they'll be there. But I appreciate you taking the last 45 minutes or so to share a little bit about your story and the story of Ignite. It was awesome, and I continue to look forward to the success you'll have in years to come. I think we're kind of on that cusp of some really, really cool stuff that y'all are about to be a part of and be doing here in the community and all across the world. So I appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Clark. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Beyond Rockets. Don't forget you can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen and on YouTube at Beyond Rockets. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Beyond Rockets to stay up to date with new episodes as they are released. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.